night on First at 9, this Wednesday, the 29th of May 2024. No postponement. Prime Minister says presidential election still scheduled for 2024. Executive powers. None of the presidential candidates are talking about abolishing the executive presidency anymore, highlights the president.
දැන් අපි කොහොමද ජනාධිපති වෙන්න එකට යනවා කවුරුවත් දැන් කියලා නැහැ ජනාධිපති ක්‍රමය අහුසි කරනවා කියලා. ඉන්න අපේක්ෂක ගණනාවක් ඉන්නවා.
Energy reforms. An energy transition bill to be introduced. Parliamentary debate on Sri Lanka's electricity bill scheduled. World Bank meanwhile highlights the need for roadmap to attract private investment for renewable energy. Extreme weather. Torrential rains to reduce during the coming days. 35,000 still affected.
ඔබේ විශ්වාසය දිනු සෙන්සුරයින් දැන් ළඟමැති ෆාමසියෙන් ලබාගත හැක.
This is Ada Derana First at 9 with Indivari Amuata. Live from Studio 24 in Colombo.
And a very warm welcome. You're joining us on First at 9 for the very latest from across Sri Lanka and around the world. And we start off with the controversy surrounding whether the presidential election will be postponed or not. Comments from the President. President Ranil Wickremesinghe highlights that none of the candidates aspiring to contest the presidential election have made any comment regarding abolishing executive powers of the presidency, although it was a major point of concern raised during the struggle. Speaking at an event at the Presidential Secretariat, the head of state emphasized that executive powers vested in the presidency were crucial in bringing the 30-year war to an end and in stabilizing the country during the recent struggle. However, he also noted that there is an urgent need to enact legislation that will hold the president accountable to Parliament. Commenting on holding presidential elections, he said plans remain unchanged.
During a workshop held at the Presidential Secretariat yesterday, President Ranil Wickremesinghe participated in a dialogue on legal reforms with young legal professionals.
Currently, the executive presidency in Sri Lanka is vested with almost an unlimited amount of powers. However, there has to be checks and balances. In future, will there be legislation to ensure that these checks and balances are properly enacted? What is your opinion on legislation that limits the president's powers?
Some say that the executive presidency must be abolished altogether. However, it has its advantages and drawbacks. In my opinion, we would not have won the war without it. Many expected the government to collapse during the war. However, that was not the case. Executive powers were also crucial in stabilizing the country during the struggle. Now we will hold the presidential election as planned. Many candidates for the election have emerged and none of them have spoken about abolishing the executive presidency. Many of the president's powers have been given over to the 9 provincial councils and some others have been allocated to independent commissions and parliamentary oversight committees. We need to enact legislation that holds the President accountable to Parliament. As per the new Economic Transformation Act, a government must present a 4-year economic plan. At the end of those 4 years, they must reveal whether the plan has been successfully completed or not. If not, they must state the reasons for their failure. We need to introduce such national policies to every sector and ensure that Parliament can properly carry out its duties.
Crunchy goodness for hunger on the go.
ජීවිතේ හැම තැනකදීම ස්මාර්ට් වෙන්න. පොලිය විතරක් ගෙවාගෙන යන්න. CDB Smart Draft.
Prime Minister Dinesh Gunawardena assures that the presidential election will be held this year as planned and in accordance with the provisions laid out by the Constitution. Addressing media in Colombo today, the Premier said steps will be taken to hold both provincial council elections and local government elections following the parliamentary polls. His comments came a day after the General Secretary of the United National Party, Palitha Rangabandara, said government should postpone the upcoming presidential election and even the parliamentary polls by 2 years to pave the way to solve the country's ongoing economic issues.
The inauguration of the Martin Wickremesinghe Hall of Life section at the National Library and Documentation Services Board in Colombo was held under the patronage of Prime Minister Dinesh Gunawardena today. Addressing media following the event, the Premier assured that the presidential election will be held this year as planned.
The government has already announced its stance. The Election Commission said steps will be taken to hold the presidential election in September or October as per provisions of the Constitution. The government also announced the same.
ආපු සෙනඟ දැකලා කිසිම දේශපාලන තීරණ කලබල කරන්න හෝ රිවර්ස් කරන්නේ නැහැ ඉස්සරහට යනවා මිසක්.
Our political decisions are not based on the crowds gathered at the May Day rallies. We are not trying to reverse or expedite any political decision. We restored democracy in the country immediately after it came under threat. We chased those who came to destroy the parliament and created an all-party government. That government was created to safeguard democracy. This parliament can continue until August next year. However, it can be dissolved before that. The parliamentarians themselves can request to dissolve parliament. However, there is a way to do that. The presidential election will be held first, and the next will be the parliamentary election. After the parliamentary election, both provincial councils and local government elections will be held. There is no point in worrying about the statements made without any responsibility.
ඔය කවුරුත් ප්‍රකාශ කරන ඒවා වගකීමක් නැතුව ආණ්ඩුවේ කිසිම අවස්ථාවක කිසිම සාකච්ඡාවක් නැකරුණු දෙයක්.
The US ambassador in Colombo, Julie Chung, discussed the importance of free and fair elections with the Election Commission today. The discussion with the Election Commission took place in Colombo. During the meeting, the Election Commission has briefed the US envoy on plans for elections and upholding a transparent process, while highlighting many countries, including Sri Lanka and the United States, that face elections this year. Both the US ambassador, Julie Chung, and the Election Commission had exchanged views on the importance of voting in free and fair elections as a pillar of democratic governance. Meanwhile, at a time when Sri Lanka has embarked on power and energy sector reforms to facilitate private sector investment in the sector, mainly renewable energy, President Ranil Wickremesinghe said that the government is looking at the possibility of introducing energy transition legislation. Meanwhile, Minister of Power and Energy Kanchana Vijayasekara said the debate on the Sri Lanka electricity bill will be held on the 6th of June. Addressing the same event, World Bank Country Director Faris Haddad Sarwaz emphasized the need for a comprehensive roadmap and a clear procurement framework to attract private investment to renewable energy projects here in Sri Lanka.
A roundtable discussion themed Advancing Energy Transition was held in Colombo today with the participation of President Ranil Wickremesinghe. The event, held in collaboration with the World Bank, the Ministry of Power and Energy and the Ceylon Electricity Board, served as a platform for discussing the country's energy transition.
We have to discuss whether we need energy transition legislation also. Some countries have energy transition legislation. We've also looked at some areas such as the South Australian. It may be useful for us to have energy transition legislation. Because one is we are going to a new sector, we are opening it up, and not merely power generation but power distribution. We'll have the private sector playing the lead role. There's no other way in which we can achieve our targets by 2040 or for that matter 2050. The Ministry of Finance will also work with others, the Ministry of Environment and the Ministry of Power, on a green finance policy. So the green finance policy will also drive us. So these are the components that we will have for the transition into using renewable energy. Secondly is the new undersea cables that are coming on for power distribution. One is between Australia and Singapore. The other is between Singapore and India. Now Sri Lanka has the potential of connecting to the Indo-Singapore undersea cable. We are already discussing the power link connectivity between Sri Lanka and India. What we want from you all and the help is a plan for Sri Lanka to go ahead.
The Supreme Court of Sri Lanka has cleared the reforms that have been proposed for the electricity sector, which will be announced by the Speaker on the 4th of June in Parliament, and now we have scheduled in our agenda for the 6th of June to debate it in Parliament on one day and take the vote for the proposed electricity sector reforms so that it can be implemented. One of the biggest challenges we have, apart from developers taking part in the process, is the infrastructure development that is needed. We have identified renewable energy zones, particularly in the northern and the eastern parts of Sri Lanka. We had estimated earlier last year the investment that is needed for the infrastructure development in the north and east, especially combining the 9 backbone lines that needs to be integrated with the other transmission lines, is going to be somewhere around $6 billion in the next 6 years. So that is something that the government can't right now invest in terms of infrastructure. We have proposed in the new reforms that we need to take into account these challenges and invite suitable investors even for the transmission line developments. So those transmission lines, we hope to identify them, advertise them, and also with the support of the development agencies, the policy loans that have been extended, maybe we can use certain policy loans for energy efficiency programs, but we will need much more financial support and technical support in developing these renewable energy potential zones.
Enhancing institutional capacity and regulatory frameworks for renewable energy procurement from private sector independent power producers, IPPs, can mitigate risks and accelerate investments. A new Electricity Act is currently with the Parliament as we speak. Under this new framework, the government is considering the establishment of 1. New regulations for renewable energy power procurement from IPPs in the private sector, and transparent policy and regulatory frameworks and guidelines for land acquisition and grid connectivity related activities for renewable energy capacity augmentation by the private sector. However, private investment in the energy sector still faces financial risks from utility performance and currency concerns, technical challenges with grid integration, and some institutional barriers requiring more regulations governing competitive procurement. Moving forward, and to attract private investments to meet Sri Lanka's ambitious goal for energy transition, it would be critical to develop a comprehensive roadmap with a well-sequenced investment plan for bankable renewable energy projects, grid modernization strategies to facilitate renewable energy integration, and a clear and transparent procurement framework and regulations to govern renewable energy power procurement.
As strong gusty winds continue, we have some updates on that. But before that, we take you to the number of trade union action that is set up. A number of trade unions are set to engage in strike action island-wide tomorrow, demanding immediate solutions to the teacher-principal salary discrepancies. Meanwhile, commenting on trade union action initiated by non-academic staff of state universities, chairperson of the University Grant Commission, Senior Professor Sampath Amaratunga, requested professors to report back to work without hindering university studies.
The teacher-principal trade union announced their decision to report sick tomorrow as part of their nationwide strike action. They demanded immediate solutions to the teacher-principal salary discrepancies. This comes in a backdrop where President Ranil Wickremesinghe appointed a committee to look into the matter and give necessary recommendations. However, the Ceylon Teacher Service Union said they will not join the strike action tomorrow. Subsequently, the Ministry of Education issued a statement informing that all state schools will function as usual both tomorrow and the day after. In the meantime, the University Trade Union Joint Committee announced that the trade union action initiated by university non-academic staff will continue. On the 15th of May, the strike launched by non-academic staff of state universities demanding a positive response to long-standing issues in the university system turned intense as the cabinet further delayed approval for their proposal on monthly allowances and wage disparities. Chairperson of the University Grants Commission, Senior Professor Sampath Amaratunga, requested protesters to report back to work without hindering university studies.
දරුවන්ගේ මහපොළ ලබා දීමේ ඉඳලා පුරප්පාඩු පිරවීම දක්වා දරුවෝ විශාල ප්‍රමාණයක් බලාගෙන ඉන්නවා ගෙවල් වල.
A number of students are awaiting approval of their university admission. Not only the university education system but the advanced level studies are also hampered due to this strike. I request the protesters to resume work as we will actively work towards providing solutions to their demands.
අර ජනාධිපතිතුමාගේ කමිටුවට අපි සක්‍රියව සහභාගී වෙනවා. තමුන්නාන්සේලාගේ ඉල්ලීම් ලබා දෙනවා.
Similarly, a protest was launched by several trade unions, including the Inter-University Students' Federation, in front of the Fort Railway Station this afternoon. The protest action was against the privatization of education and sale of national resources.
The anti-terrorist squad of Gujarat is preparing to visit Sri Lanka to further investigate the arrest of 4 ISIS terrorists at Ahmedabad airport. This development comes after Sri Lanka police recently detained 2 suspects said to have aided the 4 terrorists. Police seek public assistance to capture the 3rd suspect, whose images and CCTV footage were released to the media.
On the 19th of May, the anti-terrorist squad of Gujarat arrested 4 Sri Lankan nationals reported to be active members of the proscribed terrorist organisation ISIS at the Sardar Vallabhbhai Patel International Airport in Ahmedabad. Following the apprehension, the Gujarat police, which revealed that the suspects were planning attacks in India, said that the case pertaining to these suspects has been registered under provisions of India's Unlawful Activities Prevention Act, the Indian Penal Code and the Arms Act. At the same time, a joint investigation was launched by the Criminal Investigation Department, Terrorist Investigation Division and Intelligence, and 2 suspects who are said to have aided the 4 terrorists were apprehended by the authorities. Recently, police also published images and CCTV footage of another suspect named Osman Gerard, who is said to have aided the terrorists. Investigations are underway to uncover whether there are more terrorist operatives in Sri Lanka. Indian media reported that the Gujarat anti-terrorist squad is preparing to visit Sri Lanka to further investigate the arrest of 4 ISIS terrorists at Ahmedabad airport.
Minister of Foreign Affairs Ali Sabri says Russia will now require Sri Lanka's Defence Ministry clearance for visit visas for ex-servicemen of Sri Lanka. The foreign minister mentioned this following a meeting with the Russian ambassador in Colombo, Levan Zagarian. The minister noted that discussions were held on addressing the urgent situation of Sri Lankans being deployed in the Russia-Ukraine conflict and added that both parties agreed to take immediate steps to resolve the issues. He added that the upcoming visit by Sri Lanka's State Minister of Foreign Affairs Taraka Balasurya to Russia will enable further discussions to find a solution to the matter. Well, strong gusty winds coupled with heavy rains continue to affect the country for the past few days, but the Met Department says some positive news is awaiting the country as the prevailing heavy rains can be anticipated to slightly subside during the upcoming days. However, with the persisting adverse weather patterns, water capacities of several rivers are on the rise, posing possible risk of potential flooding. Meanwhile, the Disaster Management Centre also noted a decline in the total number of people affected due to bad weather, but the current figures still stand at 35,222.
The highest rainfall was recorded from Karagala area in Ratnabura district during the last 24 hours, measuring 135.2 millimeters. According to the latest data issued by the Disaster Management Centre, 35,222 persons belonging to 9,587 families in 20 districts are severely affected due to the torrential rains. The Irrigation Department meanwhile said that the water capacities of River Kalu, Nilwala and Ging continue to remain on the rise, posing risks of potential flooding. As a result, residents of low-lying areas are advised to remain vigilant. As the current adverse weather continues, the Natural Hazards Early Warning Centre of the Met Department, issuing an amber advisory, urged the fishing and naval communities to be attentive and not to venture into the sea until further notice. The Met Department forecasted the prevailing heavy rains and windy conditions to slightly abate during the coming days.
The rainy conditions are anticipated to slightly subside during the coming days. However, the rains will not abate completely. As a result, rains will occur at times in the western, Sabaragamuwa, central, northwestern and southern provinces. Further, rains or thunder showers are likely to occur at a few places in Uva province and in the Ampara and Batiklo districts.
According to the National Building Research Organisation, 5 districts are still at risk of landslides.
With the cessation of the rain, the warning for some areas has been removed and the warning for the saturated areas has been extended to 4 p.m. tomorrow. With that warning level 2 alert temper warning was issued to Aliyagoda, Balangoda, Ratnapura and Imulpe, Division 6 Division Ratnapura District. Warning level 1 which yellow warning was issued to Sitawaka Division 6 Division Colombo District, Tavalam and Nilua Division 6 Division Galle District, Dehavita, Galigamuwa, Kegol, Yatiyantota, Ruwanwella, Mawanella, Budatkopit and Dernegala Division 6 Division Kegol District, Ambagamu Kole Division 6 Division District, Kalavana, Kiriyalla, Ayagama, Alapata and Kuruvita Division 6 Division Ratnapura District.
The interim injunction preventing former President Maithripala Sirisena from holding the chairmanship of the Sri Lanka Freedom Party has been further extended until the 12th of June. The order was issued by Colombo District Court Judge Sandun Vithana when the complaint filed against Sirisena by former President Chandrika Bandaranaike Kumaratunga was taken up for consideration. In her complaint, former President Chandrika Bandaranaike asserts that as per the constitution of the SLFP, former President Maithripala Sirisena has no legal right to serve as the party chairman. The court issued the original injunction order on the 4th of this month, following which former President Sirisena resigned from the SLFP chairmanship and from the executive committee of the party on the 12th of May. In politics again, a group of civil societies organised demonstrations in front of the United National Party headquarters in protest of its General Secretary Palitha Rangabandara's statement calling for the presidential election to be postponed by 2 years. In the meantime, politicians including National People's Power leader Anura Kumara Dissanayake and Pivithuru Helauru Mayor leader Udaya Gammampila criticised Rangabandara's comments. However, TMTK parliamentarian C.V. Vigneswaran said he is in favour of postponing the election as electing a new president might disrupt the country's economic revival process. With that, here's a look at some thoughts shared across the political arena today.
Previously, they spread rumours that Parliament will be dissolved. Now, Wajira Abeyewardene says Ranil Wickremesinghe should be given power for the next 10 years. Rangabandara suggests that the President's term in office should be extended by 2 years. These statements are intended to confuse the people and to hide the fact that they are unprepared for the elections.
If a candidate secures 40% of the vote, they will definitely win this year's presidential election. However, to postpone the election through a referendum, 50% of the votes must be secured. How does the government plan to secure 50% of votes during a referendum when they cannot secure 40% of the vote during the election?
They know that they have no chance of securing a public mandate. That is why they are trying to use these deceptions to stay in power.
The country is currently experiencing an economic crisis. If we elect a new president now, that will negatively affect the economic revival process. That will result in the further deterioration of the economy. Therefore, I am of the view that postponing the presidential election by 2 years is a commendable move. That will ensure stability of the country.
Welcome back. The Colombo Bourse experienced another day of uncertainty and low sentiment triggered by drawbacks in the banking sector today. The benchmark index closed at 12,102, falling to its lowest levels in the last month, marking a 1.03% decrease from yesterday's trade. The most significant negative contributors were banks, predominantly Commercial Bank, DFCC, HNB and NDB. Commercial Bank led negative trading, reflecting unfavorable activity in the market, particularly in the banking sector following news of the Commercial Bank rights issue. Increased selling activity took place in the market, further reflecting the low investor sentiment and skepticism in the market. Turnover saw an increase, standing at 1 billion rupees with a 14.6% increase from the previous day, where the banking sector led turnover at 51%, followed by the food, beverage and tobacco and capital goods sectors, jointly contributing to 21% of overall turnover. There was a net foreign outflow of 24.5 million rupees, signalling interest in outward investments. Up next is our segment Economic Outlook with Udishan Jonas of Capital Alliance.
At today's Treasury bill rate auction, we saw the 3-month Treasury bill rates fall by 14 basis points and the 12-month Treasury bill rates fall by 11 basis points, despite the Central Bank of Sri Lanka keeping policy rates unchanged at this week's policy announcement. The Central Bank of Sri Lanka cited that the market interest rates or market lending rates need to be adjusted more before further monetary policy action is taken in terms of an accommodative stance. Since almost 70% of the market participants anticipated a reduction in terms of policy rates, we saw Treasury bond rates slightly move up by about 20 basis points in the secondary market yields this week. From a lending rate perspective, the average weighted prime lending rate still continues to be at about 9.68%, well below the 10% mark. We expect this trend to continue in the next couple of weeks as the liquidity in the market remains relatively higher. From an inflation perspective, the central bank also made it clear that the inflation is well below under control and that there is no risk of disinflation or hyperinflation in the coming months.
The International Monetary Fund said China's economy is set to grow 5% this year after a strong first quarter, upgrading its earlier forecast of 4.6% expansion, though it expects slower growth in the years ahead. The global lender's new projections come as Beijing steps up efforts to shore up an uneven recovery in the world's second biggest economy, which was stumbled in the face of a protracted property crisis and its ripple effects across investments, consumer and businesses. The IMF said it had revised up both its 2024 and 2025 GDP targets by 0.4% and warned that growth in China would slow to 3.3% by 2029 due to an aging population and slower expansion in productivity. And here's a look at how the Sri Lankan rupee traded across other currencies today. And that's it from us here tonight. We'll see you again tomorrow at the same time. I'm Indiveri Amwatha. Good night.